Good evening and welcome to the first episode of Matters of Faith. A deep despair seems to mark our lives as we approach the end of the century in a cloud of violence and hatred. Each new scientific discovery, each new technological marvel, each new indication of man's mastery over the world only seems to emphasize this malaise. Yet we soldier on. Something within us seems to tell us that though the void exists, it can still give meaning to our existence, provided we fill that void with faith. Only faith enables us to reconcile our place in the universe with each new theory of knowledge. Faith tempers our arrogance, tames our greed, enables us to reach out as well as to look within. It runs like an irresistible current through our thoughts and actions. We all know this current. We all feel it coursing through our veins, and we recognize it in one another. Matters of Faith will examine each week the ways in which this faith manifests itself in our lives, how it elevates us, ennobles us, and in many respects empowers us. On this program, we will offer worship at some of India's great shrines. We will take an emphatic look at some of her less-known faiths, sects, shrines, and practices that touch us by their warmth and universality. We will also examine each week the life and work of India's great saints and visionaries. We begin tonight with a visit to the Ranganatha Swami Temple at Srirangam in our Pilgrim's Progress section.
In its lower reaches, outside the town of Tiruchi, the Kaveri forks briefly off into two arms. They enclose, in their muddy embrace, the island of Srirangam. As one approaches Srirangam, one would be tempted to put it down as yet another Tamil Nadu town, were it not for the gopurams that spiral arrogantly into the sky. They proclaim mutely their ancient vocation as markers of one of South India's holiest Vaishnavite shrines. Srirangam wears its history lightly, so lightly in fact that scholars find it difficult to assign a date to its creation. Classical Tamil literature abounds in references to Srirangam, which is spoken of as a well-established pilgrim center. Poems composed by the Alvars, in particular the 4,000 hymns, which sing the praises of Lord Ranganatha of Srirangam, lead one to ascribe a 7th or 8th century origin to the temple. By the time Ramanuja established himself here in the 11th century, Srirangam was the holiest of Vaishnava holies. Almost 1,000 years later, it continues to attract worshippers by the millions every year. The architecture of the Srirangam temple complex is unique. Its 7 concentric rectangular enclosures seem to lead one from the hustle and bustle of worldly pursuits to the serenity and calm of the Almighty. They are symbolic in a way of the individual's journey from the mundane to the divine. Thus, the 3 outer enclosures house the majority of the town's population, complete with shops, houses and traffic. Gopuras mark the middle of the 4 sides of each enclosure. The gopuras increase in size from the innermost enclosure outwards. The gateways follow a standard scheme. They are crowned by brick and plaster pyramidal towers with projecting porches in the middle of each diminishing story. On the southern side lies the Rangvilasa Mandapam, with its elongated columns bearing a diversity of carvings. Immediately next to it is the Venugopala shrine, delicately molded, framed by pilasters and miniature eaves. The innermost sanctuary is a modest, part-circular structure. The tower is capped with a gilded hemispherical dome. Vishnu in this shrine is represented as Ranganatha Swami, who reclines in the company of his consort Lakshmi on the coils of the divine serpent Adisesha, whose heads form a canopy for the Lord. This is a form of Vishnu which immediately calls to mind a shloka from the Vishnu Purana. Vishnu is omnipresent. Because of this, he exists even as myself. I am the source of everything. I am all things. Everything exists in me. I am eternal. I am undecaying. I am immortal. I am the Supreme Self. I am the refuge of all souls. I am known as Brahman, and at the end, I am the Supreme Person.
After that visit to the Ranganatha Swami temple in Srirangam, we move in our myriad path section to Manipur to catch a glimpse of the annual Lai Haruba festival.
The red and white poles, or satras, that decorate Moirang, 45 kilometers outside Imphal, are an indicator that the Lai Haruba festival is on. The 7-tiered satras are placed by devotees seeking a special boon from Lord Thangjing, an important pre-Vaishnavite deity. The significance of the satras in present-day Manipur goes well beyond the Lai Haruba festival. They are embedded in the ground before the start of any auspicious or important event, whether it is a religious ceremony, a war, or the opening of a dance drama or ballet. In its essence, the Lai Haruba festival is a rite of appeasement of the soil. The festival season opens in March and carries on till the end of May, when the people, having worshipped the earth, begin the cultivation of rice that runs from June to the middle of August. In the traditional Manipuri manner, the musicians invoke the deities of the forest. This is only appropriate, of course, for Lai Haruba means the jubilation of the gods. It is a call to one and all, human and divine, to participate in the worship of the Supreme Lord Thangjing. The Lai Haruba festival is in many ways Manipur's bridge to its pre-Vaishnavite past. Its theme evokes and celebrates the myths of creation and the tragic legend of Khamba and Thoibi. Through 6 janmas, Khamba and Thoibi pursued their love for each other but could not unite in love. Finally, in their 7th janma, they became man and wife, only for fate to intervene and separate them once again in cruelly tragic circumstances. Far from extinguishing their love for each other, death merely enhanced it. Even the gods were moved by this searing tale of passion, fidelity and fate. The Khamba Thoibi tale passed into Manipuri legend. The organizational framework of Lai Haruba is under male authority, but women have a very important role to play in the ritual observances. Men and women are expected, in fact, to participate in equal numbers, as the entire dance becomes a metaphor for creation. Traditionally, the dances used to be led by maibis or priestesses. Earlier in Meitei society, maibis were recognized as ritual specialists. A maybe's oracular powers were important to the king prior to any major undertaking, from marriage to warfare to the beginning of the harvest. In periods of crisis, the king would turn to the maybe and address her as Ima or mother and seek her advice. A maybe was responsible for performing rites for the well-being of members of the royal family and thereby of society at large. In present-day Manipur, the role performed earlier by maibis, at least in the Lai Horaba festival, often falls to the wives of priests. The musical core of the Lai Horaba dance is the paina. In the variety of musical instruments used, in the range of emotions depicted through gesture, movement, expression and rhythm, the impact pre-Vaishnavite customs such as the Lai Horaba have had on classical Manipuri dance becomes immediately apparent. It is surely no accident that post-Vaishnava classical Manipuri dance too emphasizes the Ras Leela theme, the celebration of all existence and its union with the Supreme Lord Krishna. This is a concept that is firmly anchored in Manipuri soil, an annual affirmation of the eternal truth of death and renewal. It enables men, even as they reach out, to look deep within themselves and touch, for a brief instant, their purer selves.
Music is the most mysterious of art forms, perhaps because it is so closely intertwined with devotion, because it is a means of celebrating the relationship between man and God. Nothing illustrates this more strikingly than perhaps the Qawwali.
When thought ceases but consciousness is heightened, when awareness is not an affirmation of oneself but sweet surrender to the God-made beloved, that is the intersection at which speech transforms itself into music. In its origin and in its purest form, however, the Qawwali is a form of worship through music. It was devised by the Chishti sect of Sufis, who looked upon music as a way of dispensing knowledge amongst their followers. In a way, perhaps this was the integration of the existing Indian oral tradition. Music became not only a way of venerating the divine, but also a way of engaging large numbers of the devout in the act of veneration. The Chistis, unlike the other Sufi sects, often had a mass following and established themselves in khanqahs or ashrams open to people of all faiths. The moving spirit behind the Qawwali was the poet-musician Amir Khusro, the foremost disciple of that great Sufi saint, Hazrat Nizamuddin Aulia. To Amir Khusro, we owe the invention of such musical instruments as the sitar and the tabla, the creation of several rags, as well as the origin of the khayal stream of classical music. Khusro's music was accessible to all, appealed to all. It cut across barriers of class and creed, brought people under a single canopy of faith. Some of the qawwalis he composed have passed into legend. With the passing of time, the devotional vocation of the qawwali, like that of a number of other music and dance forms, receded into the background. When the qawwali became a sort of a musical indulgence of the Mughals, its content veered away from religion and towards more worldly matters. But the echoes of this musical form of worship can still be heard today. It still survives against the odds in stray islands here and there, as the few families of qawwals continue to transmit from generation to generation this precious secret, this means of reaching the Almighty.
We live in the age of information. Information, not knowledge. That is the bane of our times. In our great visionary section tonight, we turn to the life and teachings of Ramana Maharishi to see if his insights and knowledge couldn't in some way enrich us, provide us the glimmer of an answer to the mysteries of existence and life.
December 1879. In the village of Trichuli near Madurai, a son was born to Sundaram Iyer and his wife Alagama. They named him Venkatramanna. At the American Mission School in Madurai, Venkataramanna, a burly lad, excelled in wrestling and swimming. Though his performance in academics was undistinguished, his intelligence and phenomenal memory were evident to all. He was completely self-contained, seldom showing any interest in the running of the home. However, whenever he helped in the kitchen, the food seemed to transform itself into nectar. So much so that he was nicknamed Thangakai, or Golden Hands. The family noticed too that every time Venkataramanna heard the word Arunachala, an unaccountable awe would overcome him, as if some inaudible voice within was impelling him towards an unknown destination. One day, the introspective teenager heard accounts of a pilgrimage to the Arunachala shrine at Tiruvannamalai from a visiting uncle. It was as if a key piece in a philosophical jigsaw puzzle had fallen in place. Venkataramanna began reading the Periya Puranam, an account of the 63 saints who obtained the grace of Shiva. With each reading, he began to experience a sense of exaltation. That he had reached a higher plane of perception became obvious in July 1896, when he went into a catatonic state. His limbs became rigid, his breath was still, and his mouth sealed shut. In later years, he was to reveal that in that state he pursued a silent inquiry. Now I am dying. What does this death mean? What is it that dies? This body. The experience was to leave him drained, exhausted, but yet empowered with an acute awareness of the state of being, of recognizing that I am. 29th August 1896, Venkataramanna decided to put an end to his worldly ties. He left his home, equipped with no more than the clothes he wore, a princely sum of 3 rupees entrusted to him for a domestic chore, and the resolve to seek the darshan of Arunachala at Tiruvannamalai. Early in 1899, an inner voice led him to retire to the Virupaksha cave on the eastern side of the Arunachala hill. Pilgrims by the hundreds began to cluster at the cave. Some came to marvel at this young sage, who had been transformed by the darshan of Arunachala. Others, like the Sanskrit scholar Kavyakantha Ganapati Shastri, came to pursue philosophical discussions with Venkataramanna, now renamed Bhagwan Sri Ramana. The band of followers grew as the sage wrote, spoke, and expounded his vision of jnana, knowledge, as a path to samadhi, fulfillment. The truth transcendent is, first and last, the experience of pure being, the awareness at the heart of a perfect stillness, the fact behind the fiction of the I. As the spider's mouth, through Maya, spins out and then withdraws the web, the mind puts forth this world as a blossom and then gathers it in again. Ramana Maharishi's devotees established an ashram in Tiruvannamalai in the early 1920s. Here, the saint spent the last decades of his life until cancer consumed him on 14th April 1950. As the dreaded disease devoured his body, it seemed not to affect him at all, for he sat silently, as he had always done, on his couch, communicating by his vibrant stillness to each devotee's heart. In his life, in his teaching, and in the manner of his passing, Ramana Maharishi is like the Shakespearean character who, fed on death that feeds on men, and death being dead, there is no more dying then.
That brief glimpse of the life and teachings of Ramana Maharishi, a saint of and for our times, should serve to bring us an element of clarity in the midst of the confusion and malaise that prevail all around us. There is a divinity that shapes our ends, goes the old saying. But it is not only our ends that it shapes. It pervades to our thoughts and our actions. It governs our opinions about ourselves and about our fellow men. It determines our relationship with all of nature. Deep down, we all realize that, or ought to realize that. Yet sometimes this fundamental truth eludes us. We fail to recognize that the faith which hues our lives gives purpose to our existence. It isn't essentially different from the faith which animates our neighbors. When in the defense of our faith, we lose sight of that oneness, that commonality which unites us all, we're actually limiting our faith to the confines of our own petty preoccupations. A single spark suffices, say the ancients, to light the whole world. All of us see that spark, the same spark. So what if each of us calls it by a different name? Let's meet again next week at the same time and go a little further on our voyage of discovery of faith. Until then, goodbye.